Hey, y'all. This is a series on the Transitional Book of Doctrines and Discipline that TJ and I have been doing for some time with hopes that it's helpful to a number of individuals and churches. The stuff that a denomination has in writing, as we saw in the United Methodist Church, matters quite a bit. And so people should know what writing is done about the structure that they're a part of, especially as we approach the convening conference in September of this year, because there's going to be a lot of legislation introduced that augments a lot of what we're covering here. So it's good to know the starting draft and then what we build on top of. We've already covered, the first four sections of the Book of Doctrines and Discipline. We're now on Section 5. Last week we concluded with paragraph 505, talking about how bishops' salaries are paid, where they come from. Now we're going to start off in Section 2, paragraph 506. Before we do that, I haven't even greeted TJ yet. TJ, say howdy. How are you?
Doing all right.
Yeah.
Back this week. We missed last week.
Yeah, last week I didn't even try and film. I couldn't find somebody to replace you. You were off. Where were you?
I was in Montana, Bozeman.
Bozeman, Montana.
Got stuck up there, all the snow and ice, so that was fun.
I think the majority of at least Midwestern and Eastern United States has been snowed in pretty good. So
Yeah, it's gotten real cold here. Real cold.
It's finally melting today. My chickens are happy.
Yeah, so. It's supposed to get cold again next week, or the rest of this week, I guess.
Really?
Today's the high point.
Well, that's neither here nor there to those who are joining us, especially those later. We're hoping that this is something that people watch over time, especially as the convening conference comes close. So, on front end, if there's somebody you know that really needs to be familiarized with this stuff, make sure that you have put them in touch with this, whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening to it, send it to a friend. All right, so we're going to start off with Section 2, the Office of Presiding Elders, in parenthesis, District Superintendents. TJ, you want to read or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can start it off.
Okay.
So we're in Section 2, the Office of Presiding Elder District Superintendents, paragraph 506, selection and assignment. Number 1, presiding elders are elders in full connection appointed by the bishop to the cabinet as an extension of the superintending role of the bishop within the annual conference. They serve at the bishop's pleasure and for a specific term of years to be determined by the convening conference. In instances where a new provisional annual conference is formed, the bishop shall consult with the clergy and lay leaders of the provisional conference for the purpose of selecting presiding elders. Number 2, in the selection of presiding elders, bishops shall give due consideration to the inclusiveness of the global Methodist Church, which is a reference to paragraph 306.
Okay.
So, do you recall what 306 says? That was my first kind of red flag. Yeah.
Well, the fact that it brings up inclusiveness makes me remember a couple episodes where that word was coming up over and over.
Oh, and it comes up later on. I don't know how far we're going to get, but it comes up. That's my biggest issue with this whole section that we're going to go over is what does it mean by inclusiveness? Mm-hmm. How far are we going in on this?
So am I remembering the section correctly where it was talking about inclusiveness? Did you go back to paragraph 306?
No, I can't. Is there anything on that first, while I'm going back, is there anything on that first paragraph that jumped out at you?
The main thing that pops out to me, I don't know how many people watched my report on getting called to Bishop Nunn's office, but there was our board chair went and wanted to just be a support for me while I got chewed out. And the bishop met him at the door and said, "You're not welcome in here because Jeffrey serves at my pleasure and he doesn't need you here and I don't need you here." I'm paraphrasing, but this phrase that someone serves at the bishop's pleasure is a phrase that is used frequently to determine the headship of the bishop and how it is that they serve. So the expectation here is not just that there's a collaborative process, but that those who serve at the bishop's pleasure are in some sense, he finds it enjoyable, he or she finds it enjoyable to work with them. So I don't know that any red flags go up about that. It's just, there are a lot of people who want to have the right language in place so that there aren't any abuses of power, and I don't think language can do that. I think it just depends on what kind of bishop you have in place, whether or not they use this abusively or not. The larger issue that we're tapping into on inclusiveness was this is a politicized term that often overlaps with like neo-Marxist understandings of equity and having to privilege certain voices at the expense of others so as to achieve the kingdom here on earth or something. And so participating in what some would derisively call the oppression Olympics, but determining those people that belong to historically marginalized groups and showing privilege to them rather than having an eye to concern only with merit.
Yeah, the underlying assumption is that just because you have a certain skin color, you automatically think different, and that's just ridiculous. And then, so paragraph 306, it's called the call to inclusiveness, and it says, therefore, inclusiveness denies every semblance of discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, disability, or gender. I don't have any problem with that.
Right.
Like, this paragraph doesn't look... Yeah, obviously you should not discriminate on those bases, but if you're trying to make some kind of quota where you've got to include certain people based on this, you're kind of discriminating. And I think that's...
Yeah, so Ibram X. Kendi is one of the lead voices in the anti-racist movement. He says the only way to rectify previous discrimination is with current and future discrimination.
Yeah.
And that stands against the colorblind notion of our nation, which is we're not going to see one's sex, ability, all these things as relevant in assessing one's ability to fulfill a role. We're just going to look at their merit, and that's it. And so if that's what inclusiveness means, great. The question is, how are we defining inclusiveness? Because especially in modern like corporate DEI environments, inclusiveness means don't have white men in any positions of power. Elevate everyone who has the right skin color or sex.
Right. Whether they're qualified or not.
Well, usually they won't say whether they're qualified or not. They'll just say...
Well, I'm saying that. They're not going to say that for sure.
Well, and most don't want someone who's completely unqualified in these positions, but they just want someone who...
You would think...
No, well, they imagine that there are enough people out there so that the only options are not qualified white male and not qualified black female, but you'll have super qualified white male and almost as qualified black female. You choose her. It'll get the job done. And the question is, do you always want the best person for the job, or do you want someone slightly less? And that's not to say that...
Slightly less qualified.
Yeah. But it's not unqualified. It's just slightly less qualified. And that's not to say all black people are less qualified than white people or anything like that. It's just to say when the situation comes up, do you have a preference for people who are not historically privileged?
When the situation comes up, what do you're then basing the qualification on race and not the qualification.
Yeah.
Like...
But so what it's going to tap into here, we are going to get into the consultation process of how it is that bishops decide what clergy are going to fill roles. And in the United Methodist Church, the consultation process was not necessary in the way that it is in the GMC. So bishops were responsible for making sure that women and people of color were given pulpits. You had this whole system of guaranteed appointments so that once a person was ordained, they had to be given an appointment at a local church. And so that's how you had like pretty much tenure that was given to clergy. You let enough black people in people of non-white people and women in, and then you have to put them in these pulpits whether or not these churches want them or not. Mm-hmm. And that was the United Methodist Church's way of participating in the social changes that we've wanted to see, not at a grassroots level, but from a top down. We are going to have people of color represented in pulpits even if they're not wanted there, or women represented in pulpits even if they're not wanted there, and kind of shoving it down the throats of local churches. And a lot of people have left over it. A lot of people have been fine with it. No big deal. But you lose that mechanism in the Global Methodist Church because we don't have guaranteed appointments, first off. Even if someone is ordained, they don't have to be given a pulpit or not. So you lose that, but also people in the UMC have been looking at the GMC the whole time and going, well, they're just going to have a bunch of white guys, pastors now, because it's going to be consultation, and the churches are not going to want people of color or women leading. And so the GMC has been clear. No, in the consultation process, you have to look at everybody. You have to look at that all, and you have to. They're going to say you have to train churches for receiving cross-cultural appointments. So they're trying to make room. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too, where clergy and churches are more free in the consultation process, and non-white, non-male persons can still serve.
Well, you read ahead over this, and when I was reading ahead, I didn't see much like consultation with the churches.
Yeah, it comes later.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah, right up front it doesn't, and I just kept reading.
Okay. I only got a few paragraphs in.
Let's go to paragraph 507, responsibilities. I'll read this. As an extension of the office of bishop, the presiding elder shall oversee the total ministry of the clergy and churches in the communities of the district and their missions of witness and service in the world. The presiding elder is the acting administrator of any pastoral charge in which a pastoral vacancy may develop or where no pastor is appointed. As such, the presiding elder has the following specific responsibilities. So I just highlight real quick. They're seen as an extension of the bishop's ministry. This is primarily an administrative role at this point. They have a district or area they're responsible for to fill the pulpits.
Similar to the UMC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not much change there.
Point 2, the presiding elder should be the chief missional strategist of the district and to be committed to living out the values of the church, including a mandate of inclusiveness. So there's that word again. Model, teach, and promote generous Christian giving, cooperate in developing Christian unity and ecumenical, multicultural, multiracial, and cooperative ministries, and work with persons across the church to develop programs of ministry and mission that extend the witness of Christ into the world. Point 3, along with the bishop, they should guard, transmit, teach, and proclaim corporately and individually the apostolic faith as it is expressed in Scripture and tradition from a Wesleyan perspective, communicating and defending the doctrines and discipline of the church as provided for in this transitional book of doctrines and discipline. I don't really have a problem with this. It's just like we've already said this is the expectation for all elders. So
Right.
It's just repetition that I'm not sure is necessary.
Yeah.
But maybe
Choose be a Christian. I mean, there's the issue with the inclusiveness, depending on like how far that goes.
Mhm. And we
Because
should
at some
say
point-
again, like when they define inclusiveness, it's not this woke anti-racist thing. The definition that they offer of inclusiveness, it's much more colorblind meritocracy language. So there's kind of, I'm going to choose to hear inclusiveness in that light and not the leftist activist light.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how much of this they're like pulling from the UMC, and I don't know.
Okay.
You're choosing to see it not in a woke-ish light.
Well, I just don't think wokeism is going to find a happy home in the GMC, and I think the concern in crafting it this way is they know that there are many detractors in the United Methodist Church who are saying they're just going to be a bunch of white guys. It's just going to be a racist institution, and so the hope is if you have enough language in here signaling we don't want to be all white guys. We want to have an eye towards people other than white guys. Then you can walk this line of we're going to be biblically faithful and not at all aligned necessarily with the Democratic Party and their vision for how it is we facilitate cultural change. And we're still going to have non-white males in positions of leadership.
And females.
Non-white, yeah. You got white males. We're going to have them in leadership, sure, but we're going to have a bunch of other people who don't fit in that mold as well. So there's an insistence like we can be concerned about having multicultural, multiracial variety in the church without being woke leftists. And so we're going to use some language that pushes in that direction, keeps that door open, while also not getting on the anti-racist, woke leftist crazy bandwagon. How do you do that if not this way?
Yeah, I guess it's a good question. I don't know.
Let's go on. Point 4. We're still on the duties of provisional elders. No, not provisional. What's the word? Presiding. There it is. Work with the bishop and cabinet in the process of appointment and assignment for ordained clergy or assignment of qualified and trained lay ministers. Fine. 5, work to develop an effective and functioning system for recruitment of candidates for ordained ministry. Okay. 6, establish working relationships with pastor-parish relations committees, clergy, district lay leaders, and other lay leadership to develop faithful and effective systems of ministry within the district. Does this seem to you like a full-time job?
Well, sure, yeah.
So right now, this is one of the questions I'm asking as I talk to people in other annual conferences. It seems to me that the job description of presiding elders is crafted to be a full-time job. Yet the vast majority of conferences that I'm aware of are using it with elders that are already serving full-time as something on the side, which I don't think you can expect people to do well if they're doing all this on the side.
Yeah, if you've got a full-time appointment
Yeah.
at a church, no matter what the size is, and you're expected to do that and this, that's...
I reached out to
I
Jeff
don't know.
Greenway this last week, and he's still
Jeff
serving.
Greenway?
He's the president pro tempore of the Allegheny West Annual Conference, and he's still serving full-time at his local church and a president pro tempore.
Oh. Did you ask him, like, how are you doing this? Like, are you stressed? Like, what is your time management
When
look
we
like?
do an interview, I will ask him because you got to give something short shrift. So anyway, let's get back to the duties of the presiding elder. Point 7, serve as an example of spiritual leadership by living a balanced and faithful life and by encouraging both laity and clergy to continue to grow in spiritual formation. Point 8, offer support, care, and counsel to clergy concerning matters affecting their effective ministry. Point 9, encourage the building of covenant groups and communities among both the clergy and clergy families and the laity on the district. I just underlined that one because I like small groups. Point 10, maintain regular contact with the clergy on the district for counsel and supervision, and receive written or electronic reports of each clergy person's continuing education, spiritual practices, current ministry and work, and goals for future ministry. Point 11, maintain the appropriate records of all clergy appointed to or related to the charges on the district, including clergy and extension ministry and ministry beyond the local church, as well as records dealing with property, endowments, and other tangible assets of the GMC within the district. Point 12, in consultation with the bishop and cabinet, work to develop the best strategic deployment of clergy possible in the district, including realignment of pastoral charges when needed, and the exploration of larger parishes, cooperative parishes, multiple staff configurations, new faith communities, and ecumenical shared ministries. 13, presiding elders must interpret and decide all questions of church law and discipline raised by the churches in the district, subject to review by the resident bishop of the annual conference. And finally, point 14, they must serve at the pleasure of the bishop, there's that phrase again, and assume other leadership responsibilities as the bishop determines for the health and effectiveness of the local churches in the district and annual conferences. So yeah, you have that final thing in all these job descriptions and additional duties as necessary.
All the other stuff the bishop decides.
In which case you're going, why do you even write this up? Just tell me I have to do whatever the bishop says.
That seems very difficult to do all of that stuff as while you're doing full-time ministry as a
Well, just the record keeping part. I don't know how many people try and keep records, but keeping updated records without duplication is a very hard job already. So if we're talking about elders who are signing on to this and getting just an additional stipend or maybe volunteering their time, it's not right to expect them to do a good job at this.
Yeah, especially depending on how big the districts are.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they're big districts, then that's not fun.
Yeah. Yeah, our district here in the Heartland, Ray Crawford is our presiding elder, and he's responsible for churches up in Kansas. Dude's down in Claremore.
Yeah.
So he's hoofing it to administer these churches, and he's still served time. Yeah, he's in the biggest churches in the region, Claremore first, so I don't know how he's doing it.
I don't know. He's got staff, but he doesn't have like that staff for his church,
Right.
not for like the district,
Right.
district staff.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
rough
if
stuff.
you're a presiding elder, you have my sympathy. Thank you for serving. I've seen some people kind of badmouth presiding elders. They're not equipped for the job. Well, this is when you have a skeleton budget and you're not paying people to do this job full time, you get what you pay for,
Yeah. At what point are they gonna start hiring like district staff or something like that, and it starts adding up?
Well, and right now, that's up to annual conferences whether or not they want to take enough connectional giving to fund positions like that. They
Yeah.
can do that, but the
you
culture of the GMC is so anti-bureaucracy
Right.
that very few conferences are going to be willing to take enough money from local churches to do that.
I guess we'll see how it goes.
You want to do paragraph 508?
Yeah, 508, the annual conference cabinet. Number 1, presiding elders, although assigned to districts, also have conference-wide responsibilities. As all ordained ministers are first elected into membership of the annual conference and subsequently appointed to pastoral charges, so presiding elders become, through their selection, members first of a cabinet before they are subsequently assigned by the bishop to serve in districts. 2, the cabinet, under the leadership of the bishop, is the expression of the superintending leadership in and through the annual conference. It is expected to speak to the conference and for the conference.
To the conference and for the conference.
Okay.
2,
it is expected to speak to the conference and for the conference to the spiritual and temporal issues that exist within the region encompassed by the conference. 3, the cabinet is to consult and plan with the conference in order to make a thorough analysis of the needs of the conference for clergy, implementing and planning with a positive and conscious effort to fulfill those needs. Number 4, when the cabinet considers matters relating to coordination, implementation, and administration of the conference program and other matters as the conference may determine, the conference lay leader and other conference staff, as appropriate, shall be invited to be present. Do you have any issues with that whole section at all?
it's easy for one's eyes to glaze over.
Mine were glazing over for sure.
Yeah, so the cabinet is just the bishop and the presiding elders and maybe a couple other positions. But these are the main people responsible for the bird's eye view of the annual conference. You better believe the president pro tempore is a part of this as well.
Yeah, I think we get to that in somewhere in the next couple sections.
So it's just spelling out particular areas of concern for them, what they're entitled to. It was interesting that this stipulate that individuals are members first of a cabinet before they are subsequently assigned by their bishop to service in districts. So it's making clear the directionality is not they're a presiding elder first, and then that entitles them to the cabinet. It's the bishop brings them onto the cabinet and then gives them the presiding elder status. I think that's what it's saying.
You're saying cabinet and not annual conference? Paragraph 508 is all ordained ministers are first elected into membership of the annual conference and subsequently appointed to pastoral charges. So as presiding elders become, through their selection, memberships first of the cabinet and before they are subsequently assigned by the bishop to the service in districts.
It's weird.
So they're not members of the annual conference first. They're members of the
They're members
cabinet?
of the annual conference first,
Sure.
I think, and then the cabinet, and then they're presiding elders. That's what I understand it to be. He can't.
Okay,
The
that's
bishop
weird.
can't put someone on the cabinet who's not an elder.
Okay.
And
Sure, that makes
in
sense.
good connection. But so they have membership in the annual conference. Then the bishop brings them on the cabinet, and then gives them this position of presiding elder. I don't know
I
why they
guess that
spell it out
makes
that way.
sense,
That's
yeah.
just interesting.
Yeah, I guess whatever.
Yeah, that's the response. Okay. We are now in section 3, dealing with appointment making. So this is, a lot of people care about this. Paragraph 509. Consideration for appointments. Prior to the convening General Conference of the Global Methodist Church, which is this September, it's expected that the appointments of clergy serving congregations in which both transition into the Global Methodist Church will be retained unless a change is needed because of illness, family situation, death, the election of senior status, clergy misconduct, or the financial exigencies of the congregation. All that's saying is if you and your church disaffiliated from the UMC together, you stay together till after the convening conference when we establish what the method will be for itinerancy after that.
Yeah, all of this is like temporary, I guess. So it's not set in stone until we have the conference.
Point 2, to strengthen and empower the local church to effectively carry out its mission for Christ in the world, clergy shall be appointed by the bishop, who is empowered to make and fix all appointments in the episcopal area of which the annual conference is a part. So technically, it's still an itinerant system, and it's an episcopal system where the bishop sits at the top and makes these decisions.
Right. Not the president pro tempore.
No.
Okay.
Point 3. Functionally, though, I think the presidents pro tempore probably are making these decisions.
Well, we'll get to a point where it talks about them being involved in it with the cabinet. But ultimately, I think it ended up being the bishop that appoints them.
Yeah. Point 3. Appointments are to be made with consideration of the needs, characteristics, and opportunities of congregations and institutions, the gifts and evidence of God's grace of those appointed, and in faithfulness to our commitment to an open itinerancy. Open itinerancy means appointments are made without regard to race, tribal, or ethnic origin, gender, disability, marital status, or age. So again, we're dealing with the woke stuff. It's not saying we're going to show preference to these things. It's saying these appointments are going to be made without considering these things at all.
Yeah, but didn't it just say that they were going to make those considerations? Or did I read it wrong?
The way I read it was they're going to do it according to open itinerancy. What is an open itinerancy? It's saying we don't care about any of these factors. They don't figure in. So the guiding principle of this appointment-making process is we're not going to take into account race, tribal or ethnic origin, gender, disability, marital status, or age.
Sure, yeah, you're not going to take those into consideration. Those are fine. That sounds good.
Yeah.
But they just said we're going to take all these things into consideration.
When they said they're going to be concerned with inclusiveness?
Yeah, right?
Well, when they defined inclusiveness in paragraph 306, wasn't it essentially this meritocratic definition?
The one that I went back to?
Yeah.
Back to that paragraph, sure. But what did it say in paragraph? What was that? We just went over it.
Yeah, the one we just went over, it alluded back to paragraph 306 where it defined what it meant by inclusivity, and what it meant was meritocracy, colorblindness, not anti-racism.
Okay, let's just go on because it comes up again.
Okay. We are at point 4. Appointment making across conference lines shall be encouraged as a way of creating mobility and open itinerancy. Bishops and cabinets should share information on supply and demand across the church. Point 5. Cross-racial and cross-cultural appointments are made as a creative response to introducing racial and ethnic diversity in the church and in its leadership. Cross-racial and cross-cultural appointments are appointments of clergy persons to congregations in which the majority of their constituencies are different from the clergy person's own racial/ethnic and cultural background.
Okay, so
let me finish real quick. Annual conferences shall prepare clergy and congregations for cross-racial and cross-cultural appointments through adequate training. That's important.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going on to 6.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so I'm obviously not getting something here.
Yeah.
So explain to me what you're seeing, because 3 and 5 seem like they're completely opposite of what they're saying. Like 3, they're saying we're not going to take these into account.
Yeah.
And 5 says, sometimes we're going to take these into account for a creative response.
So I think the way they're looking at it is with the assumption that people prefer affinity groups. They prefer people who are like them.
Sure.
When you look at group dynamics, people are naturally a little xenophobic, and they're naturally prefer in-group loyalties. So what that results, though, in is siloed church communities that are only ever rooted in their own traditions and people who look like them. So if we agree that the kingdom is made up of all people, ages, nations, and races, then how do we have that reflected on the ground floor? That means that we don't allow for people to govern this process by in-group preference, but we make sure that everybody is considered regardless of all of these facts. And to some degree, we have an eye on, do we just happen to be picking all the white men? Or are we really drawing from the breadth of what we have available right now? If there is no one available other than white men, then you I mean, you're limited. But if, it does so happen that sometimes you ostensibly have an open process, but you're only selecting on the front end people that you're already comfortable with. So what happens if you mandate on the front end? You have to consider everybody. Yeah, even if, this is a majority Korean population, you have to entertain the white woman. It could be that despite the cultural barrier, she's an excellent fit for them. She has a lot of gifts that they need. But if they're not going to consider that on the front end, that's very limiting. So just look at everybody objectively. Don't let front end bias enter into the equation. And then sometimes it will be to the benefit. You have a Korean community that's surrounded by an Anglo population they really need to reach out to. So are we going to let them stay insular and give them a Korean pastor? Or would it be possible to give them an Anglo pastor that would be able to effectively start a new ministry with the surrounding population while also respecting the needs and wishes of the community that's already there?
So what if the community says, no, we want a Korean pastor?
My understanding is that the dynamics are in place so that they can do that nobody's going to be shoved down their throat against their will. And if they are, they can just leave. I mean, remember, congregations can just leave anytime they want. But that it's going to be the bishop's responsibility and prerogative to facilitate these conversations, well, through the presiding elder. It's already said the presiding elder is the main one who's going to establish relationships with staff parish relations committee that's making these decisions, that they're going to be facilitating these conversations in the local church so that whenever these conversations need to happen, they've already been established in this theology of why it is that we don't want to stay affinity groups, that we want to be open to this kind of variety. And I would imagine that if over time there is a local community that's just insular, we only want a Korean man forever, that there's going to be a conversation about, well, are you sure you want to be a part of a global denomination if you don't want that reflected in your local church? So I think that that's kind of what's going to be seen. Like, local churches are going to be representative of the global nature rather than we got our Korean church here and our black church here and our white church here. I don't think we want to replicate that. So right now, this is what the TLC is trying to figure out. A Korean has come to them saying, let's have a Korean annual conference for America where we get to govern ourselves as Koreans outside of the Anglo process and Anglo structures already created, which sounds great on the front end. Okay, fine. White people have been hard to work with. Let them have their own space. It'll be great. But
No, it doesn't sound great.
Why not?
Right. Well, if it's supposed to be like global, like you were saying,
Yeah.
like, why would you have an annual conference just for Korean people?
Exactly. Okay, so what's happening here is competing theological visions for how it is that we minister to people of all ages, nations, and races. Do we give them their safe space, their own churches, or do we mandate that everybody comes together on equal terms and commit not to exercise bias on the front end?
Well, I just think it's an issue if you get a Korean church or a white church just reaching out to white people and they're like, oh, those are the white people, or they say it's the Korean church. Those are the white people over there. We don't want to minister to them. Or the white church saying, oh, there's Korean people over there. We don't want to minister. Like, that should, if that's coming up at all, like, that's a problem.
So, and they're saying it out loud, which would be a problem. But then over time, I've come to understand how many unspoken cultural agreements there are of just things we don't talk about, things that we don't say out loud, things that we don't consider. It's important for communities to be pushed to make decisions and consider things that they wouldn't already. That's one of the assets of a denomination is you're linked to people far and abroad, especially a global denomination, where they can come and speak words in your context that nobody here is thinking or saying, which can help open doors if you're okay with that. The problem is if you're going, no, we have our own answers, we know what we want, we have our affinity group, we have our culture here, don't mess with us. When that's the disposition, it's going to be bad.
Yeah, I guess the problem would be that your church is more centered around a culture than Jesus.
Yeah. That's an easy thing to say. It's a very rare church that's more focused on the culture of Jesus, more oriented by the culture of Jesus than oriented by the surrounding culture. Like I would say even our Sunday morning culture here is primarily informed by 21st century American culture than it is by the culture of Christ. And I'm not wanting to make a dig on our culture here. I love the culture. I love the people here. But when you look at what's animating the folks as they go through their daily lives, it's not, here's the person and work of Christ Jesus and the scriptures I know. It's, here's what everybody around me does, and I unthinkingly adopt it. And learning how to step outside of that and walk in the way of Christ is a lifelong task that's very difficult. Question is your local church even challenging that at all? Or is it facilitating that and blessing that along the way? Most churches facilitate and bless the local culture around them.
Okay, yeah, I don't have a response to that.
I mean, just keep your eye on it. I mean, this is not just a conversation with me and him. For the Global Methodist Church, I mean, the trial that is going to be right before us very quickly is there are a lot of Africans coming on board. Do they deserve a seat at the table in a way that can at all compromise the way we do church here in America? In the United Methodist Church, Mark Holland and mainstream UMC are saying, nope, we're not going to have that. We're going to stop giving. We're going to leave if Africans start affecting how we do things. In the Global Methodist Church, it needs to be different. We need to be able to say, okay, yeah, scrutinize us, minister to us. We need to learn from you. You need to learn from us. We need to be connected, and we can't continue to have these separate regionalization or anything else like that. We need to be combined. And this is something that all people groups are uncomfortable with because it means you can't take a bunch of assumptions for granted. You can't just take for granted that we're all going to do things the same. You have to question all your presuppositions whenever you come and try and worship or pray with people who are different from you. You know, it requires much more intentionality and self-awareness than people naturally want to practice. We're kind of lazy. All right, let's go on.
Okay, yeah, let's go.
Point 6, we're still in the consultation. Fixing of appointments. Point A. Appointments in provisional annual conferences. So this is going to talk about in different governing units. So provisional annual conferences are as far as you can make it right now before the convening conference, when they will finally have just established annual conferences. So we're going to go provisional annual conferences, then provisional districts, then areas served by a TCAT, Transitional Conference Advisory Team, and then traditional district advisory teams. And then it's just the Wild West after that.
Is there those other three? Or I know there are provisional annual conferences.
Yeah,
do we have the others?
Yeah.
So there are provisional districts.
Yeah, there are. Yeah,
that are
I've recently learned of 2, yeah.
That are not within annual conferences?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think they are independent entities. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, that just seems odd.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so how are they done in provisional annual conferences? In provisional annual conferences, the role of the president's pro tempore and presiding elders are critical to the work of deploying clergy leadership. The knowledge and discernment local leaders bring to this work is essential. Following paragraphs 509 through 513, presidents pro tempore and presiding elders shall carry out the work of pastoral appointments. Presidents pro tempore shall support and equip presiding elders in this work in partnership and consultation with the bishop assigned primary oversight of the conference. Before finalizing a pastoral appointment, presidents pro tem shall communicate the intended appointment to the bishop. An appointment is finalized only when the bishop has fixed the appointment. The president pro tempore shall complete and submit the pastoral appointment form to the general church staff within 3 days of the pastoral appointment being fixed.
We didn't have a section about president pro tempores at all, did we?
No, I don't think so.
So they haven't even defined. I think that was our issue last week. They hadn't defined that. Not last week, the week before
So
last.
pro tempore has an official meaning in a legal sense, and that's one who fills in for an empty position. So
that could be anything.
Well, in this case, it's implicitly for a bishop.
If there is no bishop.
Yeah.
But it talks about having a bishop, and the bishop is the one appointing people.
Yeah, so I wonder, I need to look back on a previous version of this, if this is one of the newer editions, because it seemed to me in the early edition that it was either a bishop or a president pro tempore is in place. But now I think this later edition understands there are bishops. They're responsible broadly for certain areas, but there are presidents pro tempore over these annual conferences that are going to make these decisions and get them signed off on by a bishop.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish they would just make it more clear and define these roles. I know this is the transitional book, but you got to have something to work with here.
Well, how about I read through this next section? There aren't many differences, and then you go ahead and do a word search on President Pro Tem and just see if they added a definition of this role in the latest version. All right. For those of you who are listening in, we are at appointments in provisional districts, not provisional annual conferences. Where there is not a provisional annual conference, but one or more provisional districts, the bishop assigned primary oversight of the district will support and equip the presiding elders for the work of pastoral appointments following the guidelines in paragraph 509 through 513. Presiding elders and bishops will collaborate in the appointment process. An appointment is finalized only when the bishop has fixed the appointment. The presiding elder shall complete and submit the pastoral appointment form to the general church staff within 3 days of the pastoral appointment being fixed. So there's no president pro tem here because it's just a district. So there's only presiding elders. Who appointed the presiding elders, I don't know because there isn't a president pro tem. Maybe the bishop did. But anyway, they work collaboratively with the bishop to decide on these appointments. C, appointments in areas served by a Transitional Conference Advisory Team, a TCAT. I served on the TCAT here in the Heartland. As TCATs work toward the formation of provisional annual conferences, pastoral appointment needs will emerge. In areas where there is not yet a provisional annual conference or provisional district, the bishop assigned to that area will collaborate with the TCAT leader in the work of pastoral appointments following the guidelines of paragraph 509 through 513. An appointment is finalized only when the bishop has fixed the appointment. The TCAT leader shall complete and submit the pastoral appointment form to the general church staff within 3 days of the pastoral appointment. So who did it say makes that consultation with the bishop? I guess just the TCAT. The bishop assigned that will collaborate with the TCAT in the work of okay, all right. So the TCAT broadly is responsible for it. One of the themes that we're seeing over and over is appointment is not finalized until the bishop signs off on it. So this is one of the executive functions of a bishop.
Okay, so I was looking up that other thing. So the first paragraph is if we've got a provisional annual conference. Paragraph, the first section.
Yeah.
That's A. B is if there's no provisional annual conference, it's a provisional annual district.
Provisional district.
Provisional district. I don't know why I said annual. Provisional district. And C is if there is neither.
There's a TCAT.
Yeah, just a group of people in this specific area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but that's not a district.
Nope.
That's just a TCAT.
Yep.
Okay.
You're getting it.
All right. Well, we'll go on to the next one, then I'll talk about
Great.
the President Pro Tempore.
D, appointments to churches in areas served by a transitional district advisory team or not yet organized. Yeah, Wild West. As we continue to build the structure of the Global Methodist Church, there will be congregations who join the church in areas where there is not yet a TCAT, provisional district, or provisional annual conference. In these areas, bishops will consult and collaborate with leaders of the local church, area leaders, general church staff, along with presidents pro tempore and presiding elders in other areas to care for the pastoral appointments and needs following the guidelines of paragraph 509 through 513. An appointment is finalized only when the bishop has fixed the appointment. The bishop shall complete and submit the pastoral appointment form to the general church staff within 3 days of the pastoral appointment being fixed. Anything else to say?
Not really. It just seems unnecessarily complicated. Like, you got this area, put it in a conference.
Well, so the complication comes in, especially outside of the continental United States, because if you're going to operate in another country, you have to be a legal entity, and we're not established as a legal entity necessarily in many countries. So right now, there are churches that want to affiliate with the Global Methodist Church in Great Britain, but they're unable to do so. There are a lot of hurdles. Once they do affiliate, are you really going to combine them with Spain? Are you going to combine them with Bulgaria? Or are you going to let them be kind of semi-autonomous for a time being until they reach a critical mass where they could have some kind of connectionalism there?
Okay, so you're saying they can't have an annual conference because it's not the GMC is not a legal entity over there?
Yep.
So the GMC, in order to even function, needs to become a legal entity in Great Britain.
Sure. And then even after that is accomplished, and all of a sudden you have 3 churches in Great Britain that are Global Methodist churches. There's none in France. There's some in Spain, but they speak Spanish. Are we going to have them try and relate to them and have a shared bishop? Or is it possible that we just allow for them to be semi-autonomous, submit to the leadership of a bishop in appointment making and connecting appointments, but not mandate that they fall under any annual conference until they reach a critical mass?
I don't just see why they just don't make them a tiny annual conference.
Well, and right now they are lowering. In America, there are very high standards for becoming an annual conference. You have to have a certain number of churches and all this. They're not holding the same standards for any of the annual conferences outside of the continental U.S. I don't know why. I don't know who makes that decision, but they are making it easier. But to be an annual conference of 3 would really be quite something. But you're in favor.
Yeah.
Let it be known. TJ is in favor of no minimum size requirements at all to be an annual conference.
Yeah, I think it'd just be based on the area. You're in a specific country, fine, get after it. You get bigger countries and you got more churches, then we can talk about different annual conferences. Okay,
let's finish this paragraph, and then we'll go to the president pro tem.
Okay.
Point 7. Simultaneous. Remember, we're talking about appointments here. Simultaneous with the announcement of any appointment or group of appointments, the bishop or president pro tempore shall deliver a report to the annual conference committee on episcopacy addressing the specific steps that were taken to ensure that persons were considered for each appointment who were of diverse race, tribal or ethnic origin, gender, disability, marital status, and age. Such report shall enumerate the cross-racial and cross-cultural appointments that were made and the extent to which cross-racial and cross-cultural appointments were considered where such appointments were not made. The Annual Conference Committee on Episcopacy shall be responsible for working with the bishop and the cabinet to ensure compliance with our commitment to our open itinerancy and to the equitable and fair consideration of clergy of diverse race, tribal or ethnic origin, gender, disability, marital status, and age during the appointment process. The Annual Conference Committee on Episcopacy shall annually report to the General Conference on Episcopacy, General Committee on Episcopacy, the process of the annual conference in fulfilling our commitment to open itinerancy, and the General Committee on Episcopacy shall annually provide direction to annual conference committees on episcopacy to enhance fulfillment of open itinerancy in each annual conference. So this is connected to the larger conversation we've had today over creating a process where all people are equally considered regardless of affinity group signifiers and accountability for that. The bishop reports to a conference committee, which then reports to a general church committee, making sure that we maintain this commitment to egalitarian equity, meritocracy throughout the appointment-making process. And TJ loves it.
Yeah, aside from the race or tribal tribal or ethnic origin, I was gonna harp on the marital status and age.
Yeah, the marital status is an interesting thing. So once upon a time, Methodists acknowledged Jesus' problem with divorce and having left a marriage immorally and that affecting one's relationship with God. I'm not sure that we're resuming that conversation or not. The age thing, why would we have a problem with that?
It's back to if you're specifically looking to either like make a quota, like, oh, we got to have this many young pastors or this many old pastors. At some point, you're gonna have to establish it's got to be this percentage, and I just think that's weird if you're basing that on age or marital status. Marital status especially, but age, I mean, that just seems kind of weird to me. If they're
So
young,
you are hearing quotas. I don't hear any allusion to quotas in here.
well, no, it doesn't say specifically quotas, but if you're making considerations based on those things, at what point does it become like, okay, we've got to meet a quota?
So if they're making appointments based on any of these things, then they are going against the spirit of open itinerancy and inclusivity.
But it just says they're making.
Says they're considering opening these positions based on those things. They're not excluding anyone on the front end because of those things, but they're not going to select who fills those roles based on if they check those boxes. All it's saying is if there's some 60-year-old guy who wants to serve a younger congregation, give him an interview. Don't say, no, it's a younger congregation, you don't fit the bill. Give him an interview. And if it turns out he's great and the young folks love this old guy that would be great for the position, it's a great fit that you would not have found if on the front end you'd been like, we need a young guy for this role.
Yeah, I guess I'm just hearing this wrong, like when I'm reading this.
Yeah, so like
when you say it makes
you decide that
sense.
you are really lacking in some areas, and you notice that a primarily black church in another town is really gifted in some of these areas. But they're not even considering you for the appointment because it's a black community. They're going to want a black preacher. You can at least get an interview to say, here's why I think I'd be a great fit here. Here's the gifts that I have to offer here. What do you guys think? Do you think we could do something creative? And then they've been culturally trained to be open to that, whereas a lot would be insular and closed. That's all it's saying is in the interview process, in the consultation process, you're not starting off closed. You're starting off open. You're considering all options. And then you could make a decision that sticks with your affinity group, and that would be fine. That's your prerogative. But you could also make a very bold culturally decision to open up the culture or reach of your ministry there that would not be facilitated in a closed system.
Sure. Okay. That sounds fine. Whenever you say it like that, it sounds fine. I don't know why I'm reading this different. And I'm like, no, it just seems like discrimination.
I was listening to James Lindsay recently, and he was talking about how these corporate policies are written up that are in favor of diversity or inclusion. And he says, make sure they define it before you get on board. Because who's against diversity? Who's against inclusion?
Yeah.
But where is it defined? What do they mean by that? It can mean different things. So whenever it defines inclusivity in this document as a colorblind notion, whenever it includes open itinerancy as a meritocratic concept, then what it's doing is it's using a lot of the lexicon that people anticipate seeing in the modern corporate environment, but it's defining it in such a way that we can remain simultaneously open to all people and global while maintaining local independence and connection across. They're trying to do it all at once, which is a very noble effort. We'll see how it works out. But it's at least culturally going to push back on the insular nature of local churches to stick with what they're comfortable with, which I think is great. But if at any point it gets to, we got to have at least 10% black clergy in this conference this year. And so we're gonna mandate that you take this clergy that's a terrible fit. And then that would be bad. What would be, well, there are a lot of different scenarios. We'll just see how this works out.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I think we're kind of out of time. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not going to hit on the marital status thing. That's a whole different conversation.
Yeah, well, yeah, I wonder if we're ever going to come back to the...
Yeah, I was just looking at, that's why I asked you about, what was the other scripture that talked about overseers, and it's Titus and Timothy, First Timothy. And it might mention marriage in there just a little bit. So.
Yeah, so people, when you're trying to have that conversation, there's some people who say it's not about not getting divorced, it's about not having multiple spouses at the same time. It says husband of only one wife. So that might be an instruction that you don't have multiple wives, but it's not necessarily a statement on divorce.
Maybe. I don't read it like that, but okay.
What the conversation in the United Methodist Church just got to a place of like, who are we to close this door for people who have these gifts and this relationship with Jesus? Surely there's forgiveness for people who've made poor decisions in the past. Have they repented? Well, and now there's not even have they repented. It's just like, who cares about this anymore?
Yeah.
It might be worth caring about.
That's a whole different conversation. If you want to hear about that, post comments and Jeffrey will talk about that.
Yeah.
Maybe
All right.
not.
Well, we've reached the conclusion of our episode. Thanks for tuning in. We'll pick up in paragraph 510 next week with consultation and appointment making continuing. So if there's something that was left out this week, we'll pick it up next week. If you're enjoying this series, then we never get tired of hearing about that. You can email us at plainspokenpod@gmail.com. If you want to support these efforts and other things that we're doing on this channel, you can go to plainspoken.locals.com and become a supporter. And as always, go ahead and comment with your thoughts and like it and subscribe wherever you are. Recommend it to a friend. We hope we're of benefit to you and the church more generally.
I completely forgot the President Pro Tempore thing. That's in paragraph 517. We didn't even talk about that.
Okay. Tune back in next week for a conversation on the President Pro Tempore. We'll be hitting that soon. So this is, do they flesh it out?
Not very well.
Okay.
It's 517 is vacancy in the office of bishop, and that's where it's mentioned.
We will leave you hanging. And of course, you cannot research it on your own because this document is not available for free online at globalmethodist.org. So tune in next week and learn about the President Pro Tempore and other additional things that are interesting. See you later.